The wooden benches of the county courthouse creaked under the weight of anticipation. The air inside was thick, almost suffocating, with whispers, shifting bodies, and the scratch of pens scribbling across yellow notepads. Journalists, seasoned court reporters, and curious locals had filled every available seat. They weren't there for a high-profile celebrity scandal or a major financial crime. No, the crowd was here for something rarer. A brutal case that had already shaken the small community and now threatened to deliver its most unexpected witness. A 3-year-old girl. Judge Carter adjusted his spectacles, tapping the gavel once against the block to settle the chatter. His reputation was one of stern efficiency, but even he couldn't suppress a flicker of curiosity at the scene before him. This trial had already been unusual. The prosecution's evidence was thin but emotionally powerful. The defense relied on procedure and skepticism. But the name on the witness list for today's session had caught everyone off guard. "Call your next witness," the judge instructed. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Whitman, rose from her chair with measured calm. She wasn't easily rattled. Years of handling violent crime had hardened her presence in court, but even she knew what was about to happen was fragile and dangerous. If it went wrong, the jury could dismiss the testimony as theatrics. If it went right, however, it could be the breakthrough the case so desperately needed. "Your Honor," Whitman said, her voice steady, "the state calls Emily Harper." The murmurs began instantly. Heads turned. Jurors leaned forward. In the back of the courtroom, one spectator whispered harshly to another, "She's just a baby." The double doors creaked open. A young woman entered first, Emily's mother, pale and visibly trembling. She guided a tiny girl forward, her hand gripping Emily's as though letting go might cause her to float away. Emily clutched a threadbare stuffed rabbit against her chest, its fur matted from years of love. She wore a yellow dress, simple but neat, and a pair of white shoes that scuffed against the polished floor. The courtroom stilled. Emily's wide eyes scanned the towering walls, the sea of strangers, the tall man in black robes behind the bench. She hesitated, pressing her face briefly into her mother's leg before peeking out again. "Please step forward," Judge Carter instructed gently, softening his usual stern tone. The bailiff guided mother and child to the witness stand. Emily's small legs dangled above the ground once seated, her rabbit placed firmly in her lap like armor. Her mother remained nearby, permitted by the court due to Emily's age. The oath was simplified, a promise to tell the truth, spoken in halting words, repeated after the bailiff. Emily repeated them with the solemnity of a child reciting a bedtime prayer. The defense attorney, Mark Holloway, leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly. His strategy was obvious. Let this play out, let the little girl freeze up, and then dismantle the testimony as unreliable. He had already told the jury in opening statements that children imagine things, that trauma twisted memory. He was confident today would prove him right. But then something shifted. The courtroom doors opened again, and Officer Daniels entered. He was a broad-shouldered man in uniform, but all eyes went to the figure walking at his side, a massive German shepherd with sharp eyes and an almost regal presence. His nails clicked against the floor with every step. This was Rex, the K-9 unit who had been on the scene the night of the crime. Emily froze. Her rabbit nearly slipped from her arms. She straightened in her chair, eyes wide and locked on the dog. For a moment, she seemed lost in memory, as if time folded back to that terrifying night. The audience held its breath. Prosecutor Whitman knelt slightly beside the witness stand, her voice softer now. "Emily, do you know this dog?" Emily's lip trembled. She nodded once, her hand inching upward, finger extended. Slowly, hesitantly, she pointed at the German shepherd. The reaction was instant. Gasps filled the air, jurors shifting in their seats. Even the judge leaned back slightly, brows furrowed. The defense attorney bolted upright. "Your Honor, this is absurd," but Carter raised a hand. "Quiet, Mr. Holloway. The witness is responding." Emily's small voice, thin and shaky, floated through the microphone. "That's him," she whispered. The words seemed to hang in the air, frozen. For a split second, everyone thought she was identifying the dog as guilty, an idea that made little sense, but carried haunting weight when spoken by such innocence. Holloway almost leapt on it, ready to twist it into a mockery. But Whitman raised her hand, keeping him silent. "Emily," she said gently, "what do you mean?" Emily blinked, squeezing her rabbit. She pointed again at the dog, but her words this time carried more clarity. "That's the one. That bit the bad man." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, murmurs, all at once. The judge's gavel slammed down repeatedly. "Order, order in the court." But the damage was done. Every juror now leaned forward, riveted. They hadn't expected much from the child. Now, suddenly, her memory of the night lined up with police reports. A masked intruder had fled, pursued by Rex. The German shepherd had latched onto the suspect's forearm before officers subdued him. Emily hadn't said a word about it for months until now. Across the room, the defendant shifted uncomfortably. He pulled at his sleeve, as though hiding something beneath. The jury noticed. Whitman noticed. And most damningly, Emily's innocent eyes noticed. Her tiny voice spoke again, firmer this time. "Bad man." The word sent a chill through every corner of the courtroom. For the first time, the case no longer belonged to lawyers, evidence, or procedure. It belonged to a child, and her memory a memory tethered to the loyalty of a dog, and the scars left behind. Holloway sat down slowly, the smirk gone. His client's sleeve tugging hadn't been missed. The jury's faces, once doubtful, now burned with a mixture of anger and conviction. Judge Carter adjusted his glasses again, staring down at the defendant. "Proceed," he said gravely. But the mood in the room had already shifted. The truth had arrived, not through the polished testimony of experts, but through the trembling words of a 3-year-old girl pointing at a police dog. And everyone, from the jury box to the gallery, felt it in their bones. This case was no longer the same. Judge Carter leaned forward on the bench, his weathered hands clasped together as though trying to hold the entire room still. His reputation was built on decades of measured decisions, but even he could not ignore the gravity of what had just occurred. A 3-year-old had pointed to a police dog and uttered words that could change the entire trajectory of a criminal trial. "Ms. Whitman," Carter said, his tone sharp but not unkind, "does this child even comprehend why she's here today?" Sarah Whitman, the prosecutor, rose slowly. She had anticipated this challenge. The defense had been counting on it. Yet her posture showed no fear, only resolve. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. "Emily Harper is young, yes. But she was there the night of the crime. She saw what happened, and though her words are simple, they may prove to be the clearest truth in this case." The defense attorney, Mark Holloway, scoffed loudly enough for the jury to hear. He leaned toward his client, muttering, "This is ridiculous." His client, the accused, a man named Richard Keller, shifted uneasily in his chair, tugging at his sleeve again. The motion, small as it was, did not go unnoticed. The jury, 12 ordinary citizens sworn to impartiality, now found themselves leaning forward, their eyes glued to the little girl, perched in the witness stand. Some softened, their parental instincts stirring. Others remained skeptical, wary of theatrics in a trial that demanded cold, hard evidence. Whitman stepped closer to Emily, lowering her voice so it carried both warmth and weight. "Emily, can you tell us what you saw that night?" Emily's small hands fidgeted with the rabbit in her lap. Her legs swung nervously, not touching the ground. For a long moment, silence pressed down on the courtroom. The bailiff shifted uneasily. Reporters poised their pens, ready to scribble the first word she might say. The little girl finally looked up, her eyes moving past Whitman to the German shepherd, sitting obediently near Officer Daniels. Her lips parted. "He was there," she whispered, pointing again at the dog. "He helped me." The simplicity of the statement carried enormous weight. Whitman nodded gently. "Yes, sweetheart. That dog is named Rex. He's very brave." "Do you remember what he did?" Emily squeezed her rabbit tighter. "He bit the bad man." The ripple that ran through the courtroom was impossible to contain. The jury exchanged glances. A woman in the gallery clasped her hands together, eyes wide. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection." Holloway's voice cracked with fury. "This is hearsay from a toddler. She's been coached, manipulated. This entire display is prejudicial." "And sit down, Mr. Holloway," Judge Carter interrupted, banging his gavel once. His sharp eyes returned to the child. "The witness may continue. I'll determine admissibility after hearing the testimony." Holloway collapsed back into his chair, but his jaw clenched tightly. He scribbled notes furiously, already preparing to tear this apart on cross-examination. Emily's mother, seated close by, reached out to rest a trembling hand on her daughter's arm. She had spent months watching her little girl fall silent, traumatized, refusing to speak of that night. This was the first time Emily had shared her memory so directly. The mother's eyes filled with tears. Whitman pressed carefully onward. "Emily, do you remember where you were when this happened?" Emily nodded. Her voice grew quieter. "I was hiding. Under my bed. The bad man was loud. He broke things." She paused, clutching her rabbit so hard its fabric wrinkled. "I was so scared. Then Rex barked. Then he bit the bad man. I saw it." Jurors froze. The defense attorney's pen stilled mid-scribble. That small detail, the bed, the noise, the bite, matched the official police report to perfection. Officer Daniels, standing beside Rex, remained stoic, but his hand rested protectively on the canine's neck. The dog stayed still, but his presence filled the room like a shadow of the night Emily described. Holloway shot up again, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your Honor, this is a child describing a bedtime story. Dogs bite people." She could be repeating what her mother told her. "We can't take this seriously." But Whitman pivoted swiftly, her tone razor-sharp. "The police report shows Rex engaged the suspect exactly as Emily described. No one told her that. She saw it." The judge nodded slightly, making a note. Emily looked at the defense attorney, her brow furrowing as though sensing his anger. She turned back to Whitman, her voice soft but certain. "The bad man had blood on his arm." The words landed like a hammer. The jury's eyes flicked once more to Keller, the defendant. Keller's face flushed. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white, sleeve tugged down as far as it would go. The silence was suffocating. For months, the prosecution had lacked a clear link between Keller and the home invasion. The bite marks on his arm had been dismissed as inconclusive, chalked up by the defense as the result of a bar fight days before. But now, hearing the child describe the exact wound she saw on the night of the crime changed everything. Judge Carter tapped his pen against the bench. His eyes lingered on Keller longer than usual. He wasn't supposed to let emotion sway him, but the child's words were undeniable. The jury was no longer passive. They were engaged, leaning forward, caught in the spell of a child who had no reason to lie. Emily, now visibly drained, leaned against her mother. Whitman placed a hand over her heart, signaling the questioning would soon end. But before she could thank the girl for her bravery, Emily whispered something else, Words that seemed to pierce through the courtroom like glass breaking. "He's here," she said, her tiny finger lifting again, this time pointing not at Rex, but across the courtroom. The entire room followed the finger. She was pointing at the defendant. Gasps erupted. Keller recoiled, face pale, sleeves still tugged. Judge Carter's gavel thundered for silence, but silence was impossible. The child's voice had turned the trial on its head. The moment Emily's tiny finger rose toward the defense table, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from heavy to electrified. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a thunderclap. The 3-year-old wasn't pointing at the police dog anymore. She was pointing at Richard Keller, the man accused of terrorizing her family. Gasps broke out instantly, some sharp enough to echo. A woman in the gallery clasped her hand over her mouth. One of the jurors stiffened visibly, his pen slipping from his grasp onto the floor. Another juror stared so hard at Keller that the defendant shrank backward into his chair. Judge Carter banged his gavel, the sound snapping like gunfire against the wood. "Order. This court will maintain order." His voice was sharp, but beneath it was something else, something the courtroom veterans recognized. It was awe. Prosecutor Sarah Whitman froze for a moment, then stood taller. She had anticipated resistance, tears, even silence from the child. She had not anticipated a direct accusation, but she knew in her gut she had to harness this moment without appearing to exploit it. "Emily," she said softly, "can you tell us why you pointed at that man?" The little girl shifted in her chair. She clutched her rabbit tighter, ears brushing her chin. Her voice was shaky, but the microphone carried it clearly. "Because he's the bad man." Rex bit him. It was simple, pure, devastating. The gallery erupted again, this time with murmurs and frantic note-taking from reporters. Mark Calloway shot to his feet like a spring uncoiled, his face flushed red. "Objection. Outrageous. This is direct identification from a toddler. She has been manipulated, Your Honor. The state is parading a traumatized child as a weapon of sympathy, nothing more." Judge Carter's gavel cracked again. "Sit down, Mr. Holloway. You'll have your chance to cross-examine." But Keller wasn't waiting for the process. He shifted in his seat, pulling at his sleeve again, as though it were strangling him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and though he tried to compose himself, the jury noticed every twitch. Jurors are trained to observe, and in that instant their eyes burned into him. Whitman took a breath and continued, careful to keep her voice gentle. "Emily, when you say Rex bit the bad man, do you remember where?" The little girl nodded. She pointed to her own forearm, tiny fingers gripping as though reenacting teeth sinking into flesh. A collective gasp swept the room. Officer Daniels, standing with Rex, confirmed with a simple nod. The police dog's report documented a bite on Keller's left forearm the night of the crime. The scar photographs filed into evidence, but dismissed as weak suddenly, became vivid in every juror's imagination. Holloway slammed his hand onto the table, unable to contain himself. "This is leading the witness. She's a child, for God's sake. She doesn't understand what she's saying." But Whitman turned, her eyes narrowing with laser focus. "Then explain how her testimony aligns perfectly with your client's injury, Mr. Holloway. Explain how a 3-year-old could fabricate that detail without ever being told." The defense attorney opened his mouth, but no words came out. His client sat frozen, pale as paper. The jury didn't move. They didn't blink. Whitman returned to Emily, her tone tender. "You're being very brave, sweetheart. One last question. What did the bad man do the night Rex bit him?" Emily's face scrunched in concentration, her innocence warring with the dark memory. Finally, she whispered, "He broke the door. He scared Mommy. He looked at me. Then he ran. Rex got him." Her voice cracked on the last word. Her mother reached over, wrapping an arm around her. Tears streaked the woman's face as she kissed her daughter's temple. The courtroom was no longer breathing. The words of a child had painted the night in strokes more vivid than any police report ever could. Judge Carter leaned back, rubbing his temple, deep in thought. He was no stranger to children testifying, but this was different. Emily's words were not rehearsed or coached. They carried the raw, unfiltered truth of memory. The defense scrambled to recover. Holloway finally stood again, lowering his voice, trying to sound calm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, turning to face them directly, "you are being swept away by emotion. She is 3 years old. 3. Children at that age believe in monsters under the bed, in imaginary friends. Are we now to decide a man's fate on the fantasies of a toddler?" But even as he spoke, his words rang hollow. The juror's eyes flicked Keller, and Keller betrayed himself again, shifting, tugging at his sleeve, trying to hide what no sleeve could cover forever. Whitman let silence hang for a moment before speaking again. Sometimes the simplest truths come from the purest voices. This child has no motive to lie, no gain from this case. Yet she has given us the same story the evidence tried to tell. The defendant didn't want you to believe it, but Emily made you see it. The jurors' faces were stone, but their silence spoke volumes. Judge Carter finally raised his gavel. "We will recess until after lunch. Cross-examination will resume when we return. Court is adjourned." The bang of the gavel echoed like a cannon shot, releasing the room from its spell. The gallery erupted instantly, reporters darting for the door to file breaking news. Emily's mother gathered daughter in her arms, whispering words of comfort. The child leaned against her, exhausted, Rabbit still clutched tight. Rex stood silently beside Officer Daniels, tail thumping once against the floor, as though aware he had been vindicated. But at the defense table, chaos reigned. Keller hissed furiously at his lawyer, his voice low but frantic. Holloway hissed back, trying to calm him, but his own hands shook as he shuffled through papers. They both knew the trial had turned a corner. Outside the courtroom, the sky had darkened with storm clouds, as though nature itself echoed the tension inside. For the jury, there was no going back. They had seen the finger point, heard the words of innocence, and witnessed the defendant's unease. The child had given them something no lawyer could argue away, the memory of truth. And in that moment, the scales of justice tipped heavily against Richard Keller. The courtroom reconvened after lunch, but it was not the same room that had emptied hours earlier. Something fundamental had shifted. The jurors returned to their seats, their faces tighter, heavier with responsibility. Even the gallery, once buzzing with restless chatter, settled into a charged silence. Everyone knew the trial had taken a dramatic turn, all because of 2 words from the smallest person in the room. "Bad man." They lingered like a ghost, replaying in every ear. No legal argument could erase them. No objection could mute their echo. Judge Carter entered, robe swishing, his face unreadable. He struck the gavel once. Court is now in session. At the prosecution's table, Sarah Whitman sat with her files neatly stacked, her demeanor calm, but her heart pounding. She knew the morning session had been a gift. Emily had given them something that no adult witness, no piece of evidence, could have matched. But Whitman also knew what was coming next. The defense would attack. And Holloway was a snake when cornered. The bailiff opened the side door, and Emily returned, still holding her stuffed rabbit, her mother guiding her carefully. She looked smaller after the break, as though the weight of her words had drained her. The jury's eyes softened as she climbed back into the witness chair, dangling legs swinging, Bunny clutched against her chest. Holloway rose from his chair, smoothing his suit jacket with deliberate slowness. His smirk had returned, but it was thinner now, stretched too tight. He approached the witness stand with the exaggerated caution of a man handling fragile glass. Good afternoon. Emily, he began, his voice honeyed, almost sing-song. Do you remember me? I'm Mark. I just want to talk, okay? Emily blinked at him, silent. Her mother gave her a gentle nod. Emily nodded back, whispering, Okay. Holloway smiled, turning slightly to the jury to show his patient, fatherly demeanor. Now, Emily, you're 3 years old, right? That's very young. You must play with dolls and toys every day. Emily held up her rabbit. This is Bunny. A chuckle rippled through the gallery. Holloway seized on it. Bunny, of course. And do you and Bunny sometimes play pretend? Like make-believe games? Yes, Emily said. Ah, Holloway said, raising his eyebrows dramatically. So you sometimes imagine things. Monsters, superheroes, maybe? Things that aren't real? Emily frowned, clutching Bunny tighter. No, Mommy says monsters aren't real. The jury smiled faintly. Holloway's grin faltered. He regrouped. Of course, of course. But sometimes dreams feel real, don't they? Do you have dreams, Emily? Yes. Could it be? He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. That you dreamed about a bad man? And maybe Rex biting him? That's scary, right? Maybe it was just a dream. Emily's small voice, certain now, cut through his ploy. No, I saw him. The gallery gasped. Whitman hid her smile behind her hand. Holloway straightened, forcing a laugh. Children confuse things, ladies and gentlemen. They see something on television, hear a story, and suddenly it's their memory. He turned back to Emily. Tell me, Emily, has your mommy ever told you about what happened that night? Emily shook her head. Mommy cries. She doesn't talk about it. The jury shifted. One woman dabbed her eyes. Holloway's jaw tightened. He switched tactics. Emily, you said Rex bit the bad man. But Rex is a police dog. He bites lots of people. Maybe you saw him bite someone else. Not my client. Maybe another man? Emily's brow furrowed. She pointed again, her little hand steady as stone. It was him. Every eye followed her finger. It landed on Keller, whose face drained of color. He tugged furiously at his sleeve again, as if the fabric itself could hide his guilt. The jury saw. They all saw. Holloway's composure cracked. His voice rose harsher now. Emily, you're 3 years old. You can't possibly remember details like that. Whitman shot up. Objection. Badgering the witness. Judge Carter slammed his gavel. Sustained. Mr. Holloway, lower your tone. Holloway exhaled sharply, his polished performance unraveling. He looked at the jury, desperation creeping into his features. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot base a man's life on the words of a toddler. She is sweet, yes. Innocent, yes. But reliable? No. This is sympathy, not justice. But his words rang hollow. The jurors' eyes told the truth. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Keller, and at the sleeve he couldn't stop pulling. Whitman rose as Holloway retreated, her voice soft but firm. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this brave little girl. I request she be excused. Judge Carter nodded. The witness may step down. Emily's mother scooped her daughter into her arms. The courtroom softened, every heart watching as the small child was carried out. Rex's ears perked, and the dog let out a quiet whine as though saluting her courage. The door closed behind them, leaving the courtroom with a silence that pressed like weight. Judge Carter cleared his throat. We will proceed with evidence review. Counsel, prepare your closing arguments for tomorrow. The gavel struck, ending the session, but no one moved immediately. Jurors sat frozen, their minds replaying the image of a child, pointing with certainty. Lawyers shuffled papers with hands that trembled slightly. Reporters scribbled frantically. knowing the headline was already written. Toddler identifies defendant in courtroom showdown. Keller slumped in his chair, his face pale, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Holloway leaned in, whispering harshly, but the defendant barely listened. His sleeve, despite his efforts, had ridden up just enough to show faint scars, and the jurors had noticed. When they finally stood to leave, the jurors avoided Keller's gaze. Their faces were sealed, unreadable, but their silence carried judgment heavier than words. That night, the town buzzed with rumors. Neighbors whispered about the bravery of a 3-year-old. Families around dinner tables spoke about the loyalty of a police dog. And in every conversation, one truth was repeated. The trial was already over. Inside the courthouse, the echo of 2 words still lingered, impossible to erase. Bad man. And tomorrow, those words would grow even louder. The courtroom reconvened early the next morning, sunlight streaming through tall windows and casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. The jurors arrived first, still silent from yesterday's shocking events. Each carried the weight of Emily's words in their minds. Bad man. The memory clung like a shadow, impossible to shake. At the prosecution's table, Sarah Whitman organized her files carefully. She knew the morning session would be crucial. Emily's testimony had stunned the court, but now it needed to be reinforced with tangible evidence details that would leave no room for doubt. Detective Frank Laird, the lead investigator on the home invasion case, was called to the stand. His presence alone carried authority. The courtroom had witnessed him in interviews and depositions, but today he was the bridge between Emily's memory and the physical evidence that proved it. Detective Laird, Whitman began, can you describe the injuries found on the suspect the night of the home invasion? Laird adjusted his badge, clearing his throat. Yes, ma'am. When officers apprehended Richard Keller, we noticed bite marks on his left forearm. They matched Rex's jaw imprint almost perfectly. A K-9 had latched on during the suspect's attempt to flee the scene. Photos were taken immediately afterward. At the time, we filed them as evidence, but they were not conclusive without corroborating testimony. Whitman nodded. And did anyone else see these injuries occur? The detective glanced toward the witness stand. The child, Emily Harper. She observed Rex bite the suspect. Her account matches the photos and police report precisely. The bite marks correspond in size, location, and depth. The jury leaned forward, absorbing the gravity. Emily's words, previously dismissed as the ramblings of a terrified toddler, were now corroborated by hard evidence. Holloway sprang to his feet. Objection. The detective is testifying to what a child allegedly saw. That is hearsay. Judge Carter banged his gavel. Overruled. The witness is testifying about evidence he personally examined, not interpreting the child's statements. Holloway's face tightened. His client shifted nervously, tugging at his sleeve again. The movement was subtle, but the jurors noticed. Every twitch reinforced what Emily had described. The marks were real, undeniable, and directly linked to Keller. Whitman pressed forward, her tone calm, meticulous. Detective, can you describe the photos taken of the suspect's arm? Laird opened a folder, revealing the images. He displayed them on the court's projector, the high-resolution images casting a pale glow over the darkened courtroom. The bite marks were clear, the skin broken in tiny punctures that traced the shape of the canine's teeth. The jurors gasped quietly. Even seasoned reporters shifted in their seats. The evidence was no longer abstracted, was visceral. Whitman's voice carried over the murmurs. Detective, did the bite marks correspond to the child's account? Yes, Laird said firmly. Emily's description was precise. She pointed to the suspect, indicated the bite on the forearm, and described the sequence. Hiding, fear, the attack, the dog biting, and the suspect fleeing. Every element aligns with the photographic evidence and police reports. Holloway rose again, his voice tight with frustration. And how can we be certain the child wasn't told these details by her mother or by the prosecution? Children are impressionable. She may have been coached. Whitman turned to him slowly, eyes sharp. The child has not spoken about the night of the crime for months. Her mother confirms she has remained silent. No one prompted her testimony until today. In fact, Emily was hesitant, clinging to her rabbit, fearful of speaking at all. Her recall is spontaneous and consistent. The defense attorney's notes trembled in his hand. Keller's hands twitched again, sleeves slipping slightly. It was subtle, but jurors noticed. Actions spoke louder than words. Laird continued, detailing the exact location of each bite mark, the sequence of events as the K-9 pursued Keller, and the corroboration between Emily's memory and the official records. The child's testimony is unusually detailed for her age. We were able to confirm every aspect with evidence. No discrepancies were found. The courtroom held its collective breath. The alignment of child testimony and forensic evidence created a tension almost unbearable in its clarity. Emily's memory was not a product of imagination. It was the thread that tied the night together. Whitman turned her attention to Keller. So, Detective, when the suspect's arm was photographed, did the injuries match Emily's description exactly? Yes, ma'am. Every detail. Silence pressed against the walls. The gallery leaned forward. The jurors' faces were pale, focused, almost mesmerized. Holloway tried again, his tone rising in desperation. Your Honor, the child is 3 years old. She cannot reliably identify a person. She saw an adult and a dog in some chaotic situation. How can this be considered proof? Judge Carter raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. The objection is noted, but the court will weigh credibility after all evidence has been presented. Whitman sensed the moment to strike. Detective, one final question. Did the suspect attempt to hide these injuries? Laird nodded. Yes. When approached by officers, he tugged at his sleeve and tried to cover the marks. We noted it in the police report. The child's pointing and description matched the exact location he tried to conceal. The room was frozen. Keller's attempts to obscure the truth had failed, exposed by a 3-year-old's observation months earlier. Jurors exchanged silent glances. The evidence was undeniable. Even the gallery felt the tension. Reporters, who had covered trials for decades, whispered in awe. A child had seen the crime. A dog had stopped it. And physical evidence now confirmed the memory. Emily, oblivious to the impact, clutched her rabbit as her mother offered gentle reassurance. Rex sat beside Officer Daniels, still and alert, as if aware of his silent role in justice. Holloway sat back, exasperated, scribbling frantically on his notes. He whispered to Keller, who leaned forward, pale and trembling. We can still argue procedure, jury bias, technicalities. But his voice was weak. Even he knew the foundation of their defense was cracking. Whitman organized her papers, glancing at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, she said softly, truth can sometimes be found in the most unexpected places. But it is still truth. Emily's courage has given voice to events we could not otherwise reconstruct. The bite marks, the chase, the suspect's injuries, they all confirm what she remembers. The jurors didn't need further persuasion. They had already seen the alignment between innocence and evidence, memory and reality. The child's testimony, once questioned, had become the keystone of the prosecution. Judge Carter leaned forward, tapping the bench with his gavel. The testimony is complete. The jury may deliberate on the evidence presented today. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning. The gavel's echo barely faded before the courtroom erupted quietly whispers, shuffling papers, reporters packing cameras. Emily's mother hugged her daughter, tears streaking her face. Rex whined softly, resting his head on Officer Daniel's foot, almost triumphant. Keller sat in stunned silence, attempting to compose himself, but the jury's quiet intensity was heavier than any argument Holloway could offer. Outside, the sun glinted off the courthouse windows, warm yet unforgiving. For the first time, the case seemed tangible, no longer a series of vague accusations and circumstantial evidence. The story of that night had been witnessed, recounted, and confirmed in painstaking detail, and in every heart that day, one thought crystallized. A 3-year-old child and a police dog had brought clarity to darkness. Justice had a new voice. The courthouse felt different when the session resumed the following morning. The building, usually filled with the sterile rhythm of hearings and arraignments, carried an almost electric tension. Spectators packed the gallery, reporters lined the benches, and the jurors filed into their seats with solemn expressions. Everyone knew they were witnessing something more than a trial. The small child's testimony had become the cornerstone, but now the prosecution needed to expand the narrative to show the jury the crime not through police procedure or legal arguments, but through the eyes of the girl who lived it. Sarah Whitman rose with quiet purpose. "Your Honor," the prosecution calls Detective Frank Laird back to the stand. The detective entered again, his presence commanding but respectful. He took the oath, settled into the chair, and adjusted the microphone. Whitman paced slowly before the jury. "Detective, yesterday you testified regarding the bite marks and photographic evidence. Today, I want to discuss the sequence of events on the night of the crime. Specifically, I want the jury to see it from Emily Harper's perspective." Laird leaned forward. "Yes, ma'am. I was one of the first on the scene after the call. Emily was discovered hiding under her bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She was terrified, but she had clearly seen what happened. Her statements, though limited, aligned with the physical evidence." Whitman nodded. "Let's walk through it. What do we know happened that night?" The detective began, his words painting a vivid picture. Richard Keller forced entry through the back door of the Harper residence. He was armed with a crowbar. Emily and her mother hid in the bedroom. When Keller entered, officers were already responding to a neighbor's 911 call. Rex, our K-9, was released into the house. Keller attempted to flee. Rex intercepted him in the hallway. During that moment, Emily peeked from under the bed. She witnessed Rex biting Keller's arm before the suspect broke free and escaped through the back window. The jurors leaned forward, hanging on every word. Whitman pressed. "Detective, what significance does Emily's vantage point hold?" "It means," Laird explained, "that her testimony is firsthand. She wasn't told about it later. The angle from under the bed allowed her to see the dog latch onto Keller's arm. That detail was not made public. Only she and the officers knew. The courtroom was silent. The jury absorbed the chilling imagery. A 3-year-old, hiding, trembling, clutching her toy, yet imprinting every detail of the chaos around her. Holloway rose sharply. "Objection. The detective is dramatizing events. He cannot claim what a child saw from under a bed." Judge Carter fixed him with a stern look. "Overruled. The detective is describing evidence supported by reports and testimony." Whitman continued. "Detective, what condition was Emily in when you found her?" The detective's voice softened. "She was trembling, crying. She hadn't spoken a word. She held her rabbit so tightly we couldn't pry it from her. It took hours before she would even look at us. She was traumatized." The gallery stirred, emotion rippling across faces. The image of the tiny survivor was almost unbearable. Whitman lowered her voice, deliberate. "And yet, yesterday, she identified the defendant and the injury that linked him to the crime." "Yes, ma'am," Laird confirmed. "She remembered what she saw that night. Her testimony matched our reports exactly." Jurors exchanged looks. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't coaching. It was a child's truth crystallized in memory. Holloway pushed to his feet again, desperation bleeding through his polish. "Detective, children misinterpret things. Isn't it possible Emily saw Rex bite someone else? Another officer in training? Another suspect entirely?" Laird held his gaze steady. "No, sir. Rex's deployment record is precise. That night was the only time in months he had been used in an active arrest. The bite marks, the timeline, the scars, it all points to Keller." Holloway's lips pressed thin. He sat heavily, scribbling in frustration. Whitman turned back to the jury, her voice carrying, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have seen is not a fantasy. It is not a coach story. It is the truth, seen through the eyes of the only person who could witness it without bias, a child. Her memory, her bravery, and the evidence aligned perfectly." The courtroom stilled, the weight of her words settling like stone. After Laird stepped down, Officer Daniels, Rex's handler, was called. The ermine shepherd padded faithfully behind him, settling at his feet with calm dignity. The presence of the dog sent a ripple through the room. Daniels testified to Rex's training and deployment. "Rex is trained to subdue suspects and hold them until commanded to release. On the night in question, he bit Keller on the forearm and maintained the hold until Keller broke free." Whitman asked, "Was Rex's behavior consistent with training?" "Yes," Daniels replied. "But Rex doesn't just attack indiscriminately. He targets suspects identified as threats. Keller fit that description. Rex responded accordingly. The dog, lying silent at Daniels' feet, seemed to embody the testimony itself, loyal, unyielding, a living reminder of the night." The jurors' eyes kept flicking to Rex. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was part of the story, part of the evidence. And his silent presence reinforced Emily's memory. Holloway attempted to cross-examine. "Officer, dogs can't testify. Isn't it true handlers can misinterpret a dog's actions?" Daniel's voice was steady. "Dogs may not speak, but their actions are clear. Rex did his job. He caught the man trying to flee a crime scene. And that man is sitting right there." He pointed directly at Keller. The gallery erupted in gasps. Judge Carter banged his gavel for order, but the point had landed with force. Keller's face drained. He tugged at his sleeve again, as though the thin fabric could erase the truth. But the jurors saw. They had always seen. The session ended with a hush. Whitman packed her files carefully, heart steady. The case had transformed into something undeniable. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled, headlines already forming. "Child's memory and dog's loyalty break defense case." Inside, Emily rested in her mother's arms in the witness waiting room, unaware of the storm her bravery had unleashed. Rex padded over, resting his massive head gently on her lap. The child smiled faintly, stroking his fur in that quiet moment. Away from the crowd, away from the noise, the truth was simple. A little girl and a dog had faced terror, and together they were rewriting the ending. The courtroom was tense the next morning, the air thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled. Even the back rows were crammed, with spectators craning for a view. Journalists clicked pens and whispered in hushed tones. This was no ordinary trial anymore. Everyone knew Emily Harper and Rex had shifted the balance of power. Judge Carter called the court to order. "Counsel, please present your closing statements." Sarah Whitman rose first, her composure calm, but radiating authority. She didn't need theatrics. The events of the past days spoke for themselves. She turned to the jury, her eyes sweeping across each member, seeking to anchor them in clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice soft yet firm, "we have all witnessed something extraordinary. A 3-year-old child, terrified yet courageous, pointed out the man who invaded her home. She remembered the details. No one could fabricate details. Only someone present that night would know. She paused, letting her words sink in. The jurors shifted, leaning forward, drawn by the truth's gravity. Emily's testimony did more than identify the suspect, Whitman continued. It revealed a sequence of events that matches the physical evidence. The bite marks on the suspect's arm, the trajectory of the suspect fleeing the scene, the broken door, and the fear she endured. And the presence of Rex, trained, loyal, and fearless, corroborates her account. She moved closer to the jury. This case is not about imagination. It is about reality, observed, remembered, and confirmed. Emily's words were small, but their weight was immense. 2 words, bad man, echoed more truth than all the arguments the defense can muster. Whitman gestured subtly toward the defendant. Richard Keller was that man. The photographs of his injuries, his attempt to hide them, and the alignment with Emily's memory leave no doubt. Justice demands that you see truth where it stands, not where it is convenient. The room was still. Jurors absorbed each word, the echoes of Emily's testimony still fresh in their minds. Whitman returned to her seat, sitting with calm certainty. Holloway rose next, adjusting his tie, trying to radiate control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone polished but tense, "I ask you to consider the source of the testimony. A 3-year-old child cannot be relied upon. Children mix fantasy and reality. Memories blur. What seems precise may be imagination." He glanced at Keller, who shifted in his chair, tugging his sleeve again. "You have been shown photographs and accounts of injuries. But consider this. The child has no understanding of time, sequence, or consequence. Her words, though touching, are not evidence in the adult sense. You cannot convict a man based on fear and innocence alone." Holloway's voice rose slightly, attempting persuasion. The child was prompted. "The dog's actions are open to interpretation. The prosecution wants you to see a story where only coincidence exists." Whitman interrupted, rising again, her eyes blazing. "Objection, Your Honor, to misleading the jury in closing argument." Judge Carter allowed it as part of closing, his eyes narrowing slightly. Holloway faltered, glancing at his client, whose nervous energy was almost visible. Every movement, every twitch of the sleeve, betrayed him. The jury noticed. Subconsciously, Keller's inability to remain composed spoke louder than Holloway's rhetoric. Whitman addressed the jury one final time. "You do not need theatrics. You do not need embellishments. You need only observe what has been presented: the courage of a child, the loyalty of a dog, and the alignment of all evidence. Justice is not convenience. Justice is clarity. And in this courtroom, the truth stands exposed." The gavel struck. "Jury, you may retire to deliberate." The jurors rose, their faces grim and determined. The gallery waited, the weight of anticipation almost suffocating. Outside, the day was bright, yet the sunlight could not pierce the shadows of the courthouse. Halls. Emily and her mother were escorted quietly to a waiting room. Rex lay at their feet, ears alert, eyes calm. Emily's small hand rested on his fur. Unaware of the role she had played in shaping the trial. In the jury room, silence initially dominated. 12 individuals sat around a long table, hands clasped, eyes down. The foreman spoke first, voice low but steady. "We have heard the child's testimony. We have seen the evidence. Where do we begin?" A woman juror raised her hand slightly. "We start with what we can verify. Bite marks, photographs, Officer Daniels' report. The sequence of events." Another man spoke, tone cautious. "And Emily's words. The child was there, saw the suspect, identified him accurately. That is corroboration." The discussion grew, deliberation tense. Some jurors expressed doubt, but most pointed to the alignment of physical evidence and testimony. Keller's behavior, his tugging at his sleeve, nervous shifting, was referenced repeatedly. Even subtle human reactions became evidence in their minds. Hours passed. Arguments were weighed. The child's innocence, the dog's loyalty, the photographic record, they all intersected in the jury's collective conscience. Back in the courtroom, Holloway paced, occasionally glancing at the courtroom doors. Keller slumped in his chair, visibly tense. Every moment added pressure, every second a reminder that their defense was crumbling down in the waiting room. Emily's mother whispered, "You're very brave, sweetie." Emily clutched Rex's fur, her eyes wide but calm. The child didn't yet understand the magnitude of her actions, but instinctively, she knew she had helped. The foreman finally spoke in the jury room. "We must reach a unanimous decision. We owe it to the victim, the child, and the law. Let's review every detail carefully. Every photograph, every testimony, every whispered bad man echoed in their minds." The weight of responsibility pressed heavily, but clarity began to emerge. Rex, lying quietly in the waiting room, lifted his head as though sensing the outcome. His presence had been silent, but undeniable, a living testament to loyalty and truth. As evening approached, the jury's deliberation neared conclusion. The foreman's voice, calm yet resolute, broke the quiet. "We have our verdict." The courthouse held its collective breath, everyone aware that the next words would define the lives of many, most of all, a terrified 3-year-old, and a man accused of shattering her world. A courtroom was tense beyond measure. Every breath seemed audible, every shuffle of papers resonating like a drumbeat against the polished wood floors. Jurors filed back in, moving with deliberate solemnity. They carried the weight of their deliberations, the burden of Emily's innocence, and the responsibility of deciding a man's fate. Judge Carter's gavel struck once, demanding silence. "Will the jury foreman please rise and present the verdict?" The foreman, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, stood carefully, clasping the paper in trembling hands. His face was stoic, but the courtroom could feel the gravity pressing down on him. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady despite the tension. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Keller, guilty on all counts." The words reverberated through the room like a cannon. Gasps and murmurs erupted in the gallery. Some reporters whispered fervently into their recorders. Some spectators buried their faces in their hands. But the jury remained silent, each member aware of the weight of justice finally landing in the right place. Keller's face went pale. His sleeve tugged higher, as though trying to hide the scars that now sealed his guilt in the minds of 12 citizens. He slumped into his chair, the air heavy with defeat. Holloway's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the table, his mind already racing through potential appeals, but he knew deep down, this was no longer salvageable. Judge Carter's eyes swept across the courtroom. "So it is the verdict of this jury. This court thanks you for your service and the diligence with which you have examined the evidence. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck a final time. The echo filled the room, leaving behind a mix of relief, awe, and lingering tension. Emily, seated with her mother and clutching Bunny, was guided forward to the witness area. Her small eyes looked up at Whitman, wide with wonder. The child didn't fully understand what had happened, but instinctively, she knew she had helped. She had given courage and clarity to a courtroom, facing fear with bravery that transcended her years. Whitman bent down, voice gentle. "Emily, you are so brave. You helped everyone today." Emily hugged her rabbit tighter. Rex helped too. Rex, obedient as always, stood at Officer Daniel's side, tail thumping quietly. The dog had been silent throughout, but his presence was monumental, a reminder that loyalty and courage could manifest in many forms. Outside the courtroom, spectators poured into the streets. The story had already spread. A 3-year-old child and a police dog had played pivotal roles in delivering justice. News crews filmed the scene, highlighting the courage of the youngest witness. People in the crowd whispered about the bravery of Emily, the loyalty of Rex, and the undeniable weight of truth. Whitman, standing at the courthouse steps, addressed the press. Justice was not easy today, but truth, courage, and the alignment of facts prevail. This case reminds us that even the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth. Keller was escorted away in handcuffs, his face hidden behind the steel of defeat. Holloway followed, exhausted, a shell of confident bravado. Their attempt to dismiss innocence and evidence alike had failed, crushed under the precision of observation and integrity. In the aftermath, Emily and her mother walked quietly down the courthouse steps. Her tiny hand rested in her mother's, and her gaze wandered to Rex, who trotted faithfully beside them. The world seemed larger, brighter, safer, though the memories of fear would remain. "Rex is my hero," Emily whispered softly. Leaning close to the dog, Rex nudged her gently, sensing the weight of her words. The child had saved more than evidence. She had given courage, clarity, and hope to everyone who witnessed her bravery. At home later, Emily tucked Bunny beside her, with Rex lying patiently at the foot of her bed. Her mother sat beside her, brushing her hair back, finally allowing herself to exhale. For months, fear had held them captive. Tonight, safety, justice, and courage had won. Sarah Whitman closed her case file at her office, exhausted but satisfied. The prosecution had been meticulous, patient, and unwavering. She had guided the truth to the surface, but she knew the real heroes were small, silent, and four-legged. Emily's testimony had been unprecedented, challenging, and utterly heroic. Rex's role had been irreplaceable. The city slowly returned to its rhythm, but the story lingered. Residents spoke in quiet awe. A child's memory, a dog's loyalty, and a courtroom held hostage by 2 small words: bad man. These words had frozen the room, shifted the balance of justice, and reminded the nation that courage can come in any size. The trial had ended, but its lessons would endure. Courage need not wear armor. Truth need not be loud. Loyalty need not speak. And in the quiet aftermath, Emily Harper slept, Bunny tucked close, Rex at her side, her small heart resting easy for the first time in months. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed. And the smallest voice, paired with the quiet strength of a dog, had ensured it.